Have you ever really thought about how many items there are in Pokemon? Sure, there are the common ones like leftovers, heavy-duty boots, and choice items. What about the lesser-seen ones? I mean the ones you almost never see. Let's go over some weird, forgotten, and niche items in competitive Pokemon. To kick this off, let's talk about berries. Every type has a resistance berry, but how many of those berries do you know? Before researching this video, I could not tell you what the Tanga and Kibia berries do, and it turns out those are resistance berries for bug and poison. Resistance berries are mostly used in draft games, but I've never seen either of these appear. So in my opinion, these berries are uncommon, but not weird. The Mickleberry, I don't know, however, is a bit odd. It's part of the category of berries that increase stats by one stage and is consumed at 25% HP. But unlike its cousins, the Mickleberry instead increases accuracy by a factor of 1.2. It even has its own value in the accuracy equation. I guess Game Freak did this because they thought a whole stage of accuracy would be too strong, but they also wanted an accuracy increasing berry. Nevertheless, having a berry that has such a specific value is a little weird. Now for some berries that are basically useless. Let me present to you the Enigma berry, which sounds way cooler than it is since it heals the user by 25% after getting hit by a super effective move. This almost sounds sane if you lack sentience, but let me ask you, when is this ever going to be better than a citrus berry? Sure, the Enigma berry doesn't rely on losing a certain amount of health, but how often are you taking super effective hits that don't do at least 50%? And if you are taking less than half, why would you want a berry that specifically heals you after taking a weak super effective hit? If anybody knows of a time this has been viably used, please let me know because I cannot find such an instance. For berries that double as useless and weird, I've chosen the Jaboka and Roap berries. These berries are consumed when the holder is hit by an attack and the attacker takes 12.5% damage. Jaboka is for physical attacks and Roap is for special attacks. Yet again, how are these ever useful? The Jaboka berry is especially offensive when you consider the Rocky Helmet exists. Sure, there are physical moves that don't make contact, but that does not warrant the Jaboka berry in my book. If you could somehow make use of these berries, kudos to you because I simply don't know how they could ever be effectively used. Now, let's move on from berries onto an unassuming item, TR43. If you know, you know. But for the uninitiated, let me explain why this one is special. You see, TR43 was the TM for Overheat, which is a 130 base power move. This is important because of how the move Fling interacts with TMs. The base power of Fling when using TMs is congruent with the base power of the TM being flung. This effectively allows any Pokemon that can learn Fling to have a one-time 130 base power Dark move at the cost of their item and a move slot. For most Pokemon, this trade-off is not worthwhile, but it was for one. Kyurem Black in Gen 8 Ubers. Kyurem Black has the firepower to be a breaker in Gen 8 Ubers, but one of the top defensive Pokemon of that tier was Necrozma Duskmane, who resists both of Kyurem's stabs and shrugs off Fusion Bolt. By using Fling with TR43, Kyurem Black has a one-time nuke to drop on Necrozma Duskmane. With a bit of chip and one Dragon Dance, Kyurem can break through Necrozma Duskmane by hurling an instructional DVD at it. If that isn't a weird use of an item, I don't know what is. If you thought TR43 sounded gimmicky, behold the Ring Target. The Ring Target is an item that removes the type immunities of the holder. For example, a Corviknight with it will take super effective damage from Earthquake since the Ring Target takes away the ground immunity provided by its flying typing. Now obviously this isn't something you want on your guys, which is the inherent problem with the Ring Target. You have to find the opportunity to trick it onto your target. On the bright side, no sane person will ever expect you to bestow a Ring Target upon them, so the element of surprise is pretty strong with this item. One gimmicky strategy in Gen 8 was to trick a Ring Target onto your opponent's ground type so that Regieleki could be fully unleashed. If you've ever played a random battle and your opponent has a Regieleki that you can't stop, you'll understand the terror of the situation. Unfortunately, this is just a silly little gimmick because it's super hard to consistently trick a Ring Target onto your opponents that you actually need to hit.
Fuck.
So you almost never encounter a Ring Target user in the wild. For our next item, let's talk about an oft-forgotten mechanic. Infatuation is a volatile status condition that causes the afflicted Pokemon to be unable to move for half the time. For reference, paralysis causes immobilization a quarter of the time, and confusion does so a third of the time, so it's actually pretty strong. I've brought this up because the item in question is the Destiny Knot. This cat toy looking thing was created as a counterplay to infatuation. If the holder is infatuated, the Pokemon that caused the infatuation will become infatuated as well. It's also used for passing IVs and breeding, but I don't really know, I don't do that stuff. So, is it good? Competitively speaking,
No.
Infatuation is super unreliable since most Pokemon are random gender, meaning you only have a 50-50 chance of being able to seduce your foe at all.
Seduce me!
Furthermore, genderless Pokemon are completely immune to Infatuation. Smogon has only one recommended moveset with the item as a Destiny Knot, and that gem of an entry is Love Disc in Gen 6, which I highly recommend you read. But yeah, the Destiny Knot is a weird item that relies on your opponent using an obscure mechanic against you, and so it languishes in irrelevancy. Our next item is the main inspiration behind the thumbnail, the Lucky Punch. The Lucky Punch is a confusing item. It raises the critical hit ratio of Chansey by 2 stages, and this begs a few questions. First of all, why did they make an offensive item for Chansey? Crits aren't helping too much when your offenses look like this.
You're not that guy.
Secondly, why only Chansey? The Lucky Punch was introduced in Gen 2, which is the same gen that introduced Blissey. Blissey at least has a better chance of getting use of it since it has a usable special attack. Alas, only Chansey can use it for some reason. Finally, I have to say that the Lucky Punch is really weird thematically too. Of all the Pokemon to be using a boxing glove, you're telling me it's this guy? With these stubs for arms? Even a T-Rex would have a better chance of throwing a punch, but for some reason Game Freak thought, yeah, this makes sense. Honestly, I have no idea what they were cooking with this one, but as of Gen 8, the Lucky Punch was no more. Rest in power, King. For the penultimate slot, we have yet another oddity of Gen 2, Berserk Gene. The Berserk Gene is an item that raises the user's attack by 2 stages on entry, but confuses it. Uniquely, the Berserk Gene causes confusion for 256 turns. The Berserk Gene is a little different from the rest of the items because it only exists in Gen 2, and you can only find one in the entire game. A tidbit of trivia about the Berserk Gene is that a wild Mewtwo is coded to always hold Berserk Gene, but because there are no wild Mewtwo's in Gen 2, this data is unused. We should be thankful the Berserk Gene barely ever existed because this thing would be busted nowadays. For example, in June, a few 35 Pokes players used Tinkaton with Berserk Gene before it was clarified that Berserk Gene was banned. This was scary because Tinkaton's ability Own Tempo prevents confusion, meaning that Tinkaton could switch in with +2 attack and no downside. I'm sure people could find other wild ways to abuse this, and so it's confined to the annals of Pokemon history. I've saved what I think is the most obscure item for last. Well, actually 2 items, Metal Powder and Quick Powder. Metal Powder was introduced in, you guessed it, Gen 2. It originally functioned like Eviolite for Ditto, but in Gen 3 it was changed to double Ditto's defense only when untransformed. I guess Game Freak thought this powder was awesome, so in Gen 4 they introduced Quick Powder, which doubles the untransformed Ditto's speed. Unfortunately for Ditto, these items are pretty bad since in the past it had to use the move Transform before doing Ditto stuff. So it would always have one turn to boost the defense or speed before having those boosts taken away. In Gen 5, these items were made totally obsolete when Ditto received the much needed ability Imposter. Since the powders only work on untransformed Ditto, there's literally no reason to ever use these items past Gen 4. So unless you play low tiers from old gens, you've probably never heard of these. Surprisingly, these items were only cut from the game in Gen 9. So despite having no business even existing, the powder survived for 1 generation longer than the Lucky Punch. Well, I think that about covers it for the list. I'm sure I've missed some other obscure items since they're, well, obscure. So let me know what other weirder items are out there. If you want to see more stuff like this, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.